My name is Daniel Hayes, and up until 2 months ago, I thought my life was as solid as the wedding ring on my finger. I'm 42, an architect by trade, and I've been married to Emma for 14 years. We live in a modest home in the suburbs, the kind of place where neighbors wave as they pass and kids play basketball in the driveways. Our life wasn't flashy, but it was ours, or so I believed. It started on a Tuesday evening. Emma was out at one of her frequent charity events, the kind of thing she'd thrown herself into since leaving her corporate job 2 years ago. I was alone at home, flipping through TV channels, trying to decide whether I wanted to eat dinner or just wait for her to come home. When I went to grab my phone charger from the dresser in our bedroom, I found it tucked in a drawer where I never usually looked, one of Emma's drawers. As I opened it, I noticed something shiny tucked beneath a stack of scarves. My first thought was that it was a misplaced piece of jewelry. Curious, I pulled it out, and my heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just any piece of jewelry. It was a bracelet, a stunning piece with diamonds and sapphires glittering under the light. It looked expensive, far beyond what Emma or I could afford. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a gift she bought for herself, though that wasn't her style. Emma wasn't materialistic. She rarely bought anything for herself that wasn't practical or on sale. Could it have been a gift from a family member? A friend? I tried to brush it off, but a nagging feeling settled in my chest. Something about it didn't add up. When Emma came home later that night, I couldn't stop staring at her, searching for clues. She looked radiant as always, her hair perfectly styled, her lips painted a soft red. She smiled at me as she set her purse on the counter. "You're up late," she said, leaning in to kiss me on the cheek. "Couldn't sleep," I replied, forcing a smile. "How was the event?" "It was great," she said, kicking off her heels. "A lot of networking, a good turnout. I think we raised more money than expected." "That's good," I said, my voice steady. "Meet anyone interesting?" She shrugged, pouring herself a glass of water. "The usual crowd. A few donors, some of the regulars. Nothing special." Her answer was casual, but I couldn't shake the image of that bracelet from my mind. I decided not to bring it up, at least not yet. I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt, but a small voice in the back of my mind whispered that something wasn't right. The next day, I couldn't focus at work. My thoughts kept drifting back to the bracelet, replaying the moment I found it over and over. When I got home that evening, I checked the drawer again. The bracelet was still there, gleaming under the soft light. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands, and that's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. An engraving on the inside of the clasp. To E with admiration and affection, the words sent a chill down my spine. E. Emma. Someone had given this to her, and it wasn't me. But who? And why? That night I decided to dig a little deeper. Emma was out again, another charity meeting, and I took the opportunity to check her phone. It wasn't something I was proud of, but I needed answers. She'd always been protective of her phone, keeping it close and setting it face down on the table whenever we were together. But tonight she left it charging on the kitchen counter. I hesitated for a moment before unlocking it. Emma had always trusted me, and this felt like a betrayal of that trust. But as I scrolled through her messages and emails, my guilt was quickly overshadowed by confusion. There were no incriminating texts, no suspicious conversations. But then I saw an email thread from a sender whose name I didn't recognize, M. Roberts. The subject line read, "Thursday follow-up." I opened it, my heart racing. The email was brief but formal. "Emma, it was a pleasure seeing you last night. I trust everything is in order for our next meeting. Let me know if you need any additional resources. Looking forward to hearing from you. Best regards, MR." The tone was professional, but something about it felt calculated. Who was M. Roberts? And what kind of resources was he offering? I copied the email address and made a mental note to look it up later. That weekend, Emma was out of town for a charity retreat. With the house to myself, I had time to dig deeper. I started with the email address, running a quick online search. At first, nothing came up, but then I stumbled across a news article mentioning a Matthew Roberts, a prominent state senator known for his philanthropy and political clout. My stomach dropped. Was this the same M. Roberts? Was Emma involved with a senator? I felt a mix of disbelief and anger, But I couldn't jump to conclusions. Not yet. If I was going to confront Emma, I needed more than speculation. I needed proof. That night I went back to the drawer where I'd found the bracelet. As I searched through her things, I found something else that made my blood run cold. A folded receipt from an upscale jewelry store downtown. It was dated 3 weeks ago and listed the exact bracelet I'd found, along with a note, paid in full by M. Roberts. The receipt slipped from my hand, fluttering to the floor. There was no denying it now. Someone, this senator, had given my wife a bracelet worth thousands of dollars, and I had no idea why. As I stood there, staring at the crumpled receipt, one thing became clear. Whatever was going on, it wasn't innocent, and I was going to find out the truth. The receipt in my hand felt heavier than it should, as though it carried the weight of the truth I wasn't ready to confront. The name M. Roberts was etched in bold on the bottom, alongside an amount that made my stomach turn. This bracelet wasn't just expensive. It was extravagant, the kind of gift that implied more than simple friendship. The engraving on the clasp replayed in my mind, to E, with admiration and affection. I folded the receipt carefully and tucked it into my pocket, my pulse racing. If I was going to uncover the truth, I needed to tread carefully. Confronting Emma outright wouldn't work, not without more answers. Instead, I decided to start with the man behind the initials, Senator Matthew Roberts. The next morning, while Emma was out running errands, I sat down at my laptop and began researching. Matthew Roberts was exactly who I feared he was, a powerful state senator with a polished public image and a reputation for generosity. His name popped up in dozens of news articles, always tied to philanthropy, charity events, and political causes. One article caught my eye, a piece about a gala held 6 months ago to support local education initiatives. The accompanying photo showed Roberts smiling beside a group of attendees. My heart skipped when I spotted Emma in the background, wearing a familiar blue dress. I remembered that dress. It was the one she'd worn to a work dinner that night. I clicked through the article, skimming the text. The gala had been a major success, raising hundreds of thousands of dollars. Roberts had personally donated a significant sum, and the event had been described as a highlight of the season. But the detail that stood out most was the mention of a small, exclusive planning committee, one Emma was apparently part of. The pieces were starting to fall into place. Emma's recent charity work, the late nights, the frequent events, it all lined up with the timeline of Roberts' initiatives. But was this just professional, or had it crossed a line? That evening, I decided to test the waters. As we sat down for dinner, I brought up the gala casually. I saw an article about that education gala a while back, I said, keeping my tone light. It looked impressive. Emma glanced up, her expression neutral. Oh yeah, that was a big one. It took months of planning. Were you involved? I asked, feigning curiosity. She nodded, taking a sip of her wine. I helped with some of the logistics. It was a great event. And Senator Roberts? Did you work with him directly? Her fork paused midway to her mouth, but she recovered quickly. A little. He's very hands-on with his projects. It was nice to see someone in his position so committed. Her answer was measured, almost rehearsed. I nodded, not wanting to push too hard. Sounds like quite a guy. She smiled faintly but didn't elaborate. The conversation shifted, but my suspicions grew. Emma wasn't lying outright, but she wasn't telling the whole truth either. Over the next few days, I kept digging. The more I learned about Roberts, the more uneasy I became. He was charming, ambitious, and well-connected, the kind of man who could easily command attention and loyalty. I found photos of him at countless events, often surrounded by influential people, his arm casually draped around smiling attendees. But there was something else too. Whispers of scandal. Buried deep in online forums and obscure blogs were rumors about Roberts' personal life. Anonymous posts hinted at affairs, gifts given to young women, and discreet payments made to keep secrets buried. None of it was confirmed, but the pattern was troubling. One post stood out. A cryptic comment on an article about one of Roberts' charity initiatives. Check the jewelry store receipts. He likes to leave a mark. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Whoever had written that knew something, and it matched what I'd found in Emma's drawer. The breakthrough came later that week. I decided to call the jewelry store listed on the receipt, posing as someone who wanted to inquire about a similar item. After a brief hold, a polite clerk came on the line. "Yes, we do carry that bracelet," she said. "It's part of our signature collection. Do you have any details about recent purchases?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm looking for a gift similar to one a friend received. It was engraved with something like, 'To E, with admiration and affection.'" There was a pause, then the clerk replied cautiously, "I'm afraid I can't share customer details, sir. That information is private." "I understand," I said quickly. "It's just that it was such a unique gift, and I'd like to get something similar. Maybe you could tell me if it was part of a recent sale?" Another pause. "It was," she admitted, her tone hesitant. "It was purchased a few weeks ago by one of our VIP clients." "Would that client happen to be Senator Matthew Roberts?" I asked, taking a gamble. The silence on the other end was answer enough. After a long moment, the clerk spoke again, her voice tight. "I'm sorry, sir. I really can't say." That night, I confronted Emma, though not about the affair itself. Instead, I asked about her recent charity work, her late nights, and her relationship with Roberts. She answered carefully, deflecting questions with vague responses and downplaying her involvement. But her evasiveness only confirmed what I already knew. As she spoke, I couldn't help but think about the bracelet, the receipt, the rumors surrounding Roberts. This wasn't just about an affair. It was about power, manipulation, and secrets buried beneath layers of charm and philanthropy. I didn't say anything about what I'd found, not yet. But as I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, I knew I couldn't let it go. I needed to know how deep this went. And if Emma wouldn't tell me the truth, I'd have to uncover it myself. The night after my subtle confrontation with Emma, I realized I couldn't keep living in limbo. The bracelet, the receipt, the evasive answers, it all pointed to something bigger, something I couldn't ignore. If Emma wasn't going to give me the truth, I would have to find it on my own. The next morning, while she was in the shower, I took her phone again. I felt a pang of guilt, but it quickly dissolved as I reminded myself what was at stake. I scrolled through her messages, emails, and calendar, looking for any clues. Most of her communication seemed ordinary. Messages with friends, reminders for events. But then I found it. A new email thread from M. Roberts. The subject line read, "Dinner follow-up." The most recent email was short but telling. "Emma, I appreciate everything you've done for the foundation. Let's discuss the next steps over dinner this Thursday. Discretion is key, as always. Looking forward to seeing you. Matthew." Discretion? Dinner? My chest tightened as I stared at the screen. Thursday was 2 days away. I copied the email details onto my own phone and quickly put hers back before she stepped out of the bathroom. My mind was already spinning with plans. If she wasn't going to tell me the truth, I'd have to see it for myself. Thursday evening, I told Emma I had a late meeting at work. She didn't question it, only nodding distractedly as she fixed her makeup in the mirror. She looked stunning in her deep red dress, her hair falling in loose curls. It was the kind of effort she hadn't made for me in a long time. "You look nice," I said, my voice even. She smiled faintly. "Thanks, it's a big night." "For the foundation?" I asked casually. "Yeah," she said, avoiding my gaze. "Just another donor dinner." I nodded, forcing myself to stay calm. She left a few minutes later, and as soon as the door closed behind her, I grabbed my keys and followed. I parked a block away from the restaurant she'd mentioned once in passing, a high-end place downtown known for its private booths and celebrity clientele. I waited in my car, watching the entrance through the rearview mirror. About 15 minutes later, Emma arrived. A valet took her car, and she walked inside with the confidence of someone who belonged there. Moments later, a black town car pulled up and Matthew Roberts stepped out. He was taller than I expected, his suit immaculate, his movements deliberate. He followed Emma inside without hesitation. My stomach churned as I stared at the door. This wasn't just a business dinner. It was something more. I couldn't stand the thought of sitting in the car, stewing in my own anger and suspicion. I needed to know what was happening behind those doors. I entered the restaurant, trying to blend in as much as possible. The hostess greeted me with a polished smile, but I waved her off. I'm meeting someone, I said quickly, striding past her toward the dining area. My heart pounded as I scanned the room, looking for them. I spotted them in a secluded corner booth, partially hidden by a partition. Emma was leaning forward, her face lit with a smile, her hand resting on the table just inches from Roberts's. He was speaking animatedly, his voice too low for me to hear, but his body language was unmistakable, intimate, commanding, familiar. I stayed at a safe distance, pretending to check my phone as I watched them. Emma laughed at something he said, her head tilting slightly as she did. It was a laugh I hadn't heard in months. Roberts reached for her hand, and for a moment I thought she might pull away. But she didn't. My chest tightened, anger and betrayal burning in my veins. I wanted to storm over, to demand answers, to make a scene, but something stopped me. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was the realization that I still didn't have the full picture. I needed to know how far this went before I confronted her. As they continued talking, the waiter brought a bottle of wine to the table. Roberts poured her a glass, their conversation never breaking. I snapped a few photos with my phone, my hands trembling as I tried to keep the camera steady. Proof. That's what I needed. Proof of what I already suspected. After an hour, they stood to leave. I ducked out quickly, watching from the sidewalk as Roberts escorted Emma to her car. He leaned in to kiss her cheek, his hand lingering on her arm. She smiled, whispered something I couldn't hear, and got into her car. I stayed frozen in place, my mind racing. This wasn't just a passing fling or a professional connection. This was something deeper, more deliberate. And whatever it was, I was determined to uncover the truth. I didn't sleep that night. The image of Emma and Roberts together replayed in my mind like a cruel loop. The laughter, the way she leaned toward him, the kiss on the cheek, it all felt like a betrayal I couldn't unsee. The photos I'd taken sat in my phone, cold proof of what I had hoped wasn't true. The next morning, Emma acted as if nothing had happened. She hummed softly while making coffee, her phone sitting face down on the counter, as always. I watched her from the doorway, trying to reconcile the woman in front of me with the one I'd seen last night. "How was the dinner?" I asked casually, keeping my voice neutral. She glanced over her shoulder, her expression unreadable. "It went well. Long, though. I didn't get home until after 11. "Yeah, I noticed," I said, taking a sip of coffee. "Anyone interesting show up?" Her hand paused briefly over the coffee pot, but she recovered quickly. "Just the usual donors and board members. Nothing exciting." Her lie hit me like a slap, but I didn't react. Instead, I nodded, forcing a smile. "That's good." She returned my smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was in that moment I realized something important. Emma wasn't just lying to me, she was lying to herself. Later that day, I decided to dig deeper into Roberts's world. I already knew he was powerful and connected, but I wanted to understand his motives. Why Emma? Why now? My search led me to an online article about a major real estate development he was spearheading, a project that promised to reshape part of the city. The article mentioned key donors, political allies, and board members, including Emma's name. I stared at the screen, a sick realization settling in. Emma wasn't just another affair for Roberts. She was part of his strategy, her charity work, her connections in the community, even her charm. It all made her an asset. But how much of this was manipulation and how much was genuine? That evening, I called Sarah, an old friend who worked as a political journalist. She was sharp, resourceful, and had an uncanny ability to dig up dirt where others couldn't. If anyone could help me figure this out, it was her. "Daniel, it's been a while," she said when she answered. "What's going on?" I hesitated, unsure how much to share. "I need some information on Matthew Roberts." Her tone shifted instantly. "The senator? Why?" "It's personal," I said. "Let's just say I think he's involved with someone close to me." There was a pause, then a sigh. "I've heard whispers about him," she said carefully. "He's careful, but there are rumors, affairs, hush money, you name it. He's got a knack for covering his tracks." "Can you find anything concrete?" I asked. "I'll see what I can do," she said. "But be careful, Daniel. Roberts doesn't play fair." The next day, Sarah called back with an update. "You were right," she said. "Roberts is dangerous. He's been linked to a few high-profile scandals, but nothing ever sticks. His team is airtight." "What about Emma?" I asked. Is she part of this? I found her name on a list of key contributors to his project, Sarah said. It looks like she's been fundraising for him. Big donations, too. But there's something else. You're not the first person to ask questions about Roberts. What do you mean? I asked, my pulse quickening. Another man reached out to me a few months ago. His wife was involved with Roberts, too. It didn't end well. Did he confront him? He tried, she said. But Roberts' team buried him. The guy lost his job, his reputation. It was brutal. A cold knot formed in my stomach. If I wasn't careful, I could be next. That night I confronted Emma. Not with accusations, but with questions. I needed to know how deep she was in before I made my next move. Emma, I said, my tone calm but firm, we need to talk about Roberts. Her face paled, and she set down her glass of wine. What about him? I know you've been working closely with him, I said, and I know about the bracelet. Her eyes widened, and for a moment she looked like she might deny it. But then she sighed, her shoulders slumping. It's not what you think, she said. Then tell me what it is, I demanded, because right now it looks like you're hiding something. She hesitated, then said, It's complicated, Daniel. Roberts. He's helped me a lot with the foundation. The bracelet was a gift, nothing more. Nothing more? I repeated, my voice rising. Emma, I saw you with him at dinner. I saw the way he looks at you. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't deny it. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said softly. I got caught up in it, his charm, his attention, but it didn't mean anything. It didn't mean anything, I said, anger bubbling to the surface. You risked our marriage for what? A politician's attention? Her tears spilled over, and she looked away. I didn't think you'd understand, she whispered. I stared at her, the weight of her words settling over me. She was right. I didn't understand. But I wasn't sure I wanted to anymore. Emma's confession lingered in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. Her words, I didn't think you'd understand, echoed in my mind, each repetition stoking the fire of my anger. I couldn't tell if it was heartbreak or rage coursing through me, but I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. Do you realize what you've done? I asked, my voice steady but laced with fury. This isn't just about us, Emma. It's about the lies, the secrecy, the way you let him buy your loyalty with a bracelet and attention. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't try to interrupt. I know I screwed up, she said softly, but it wasn't what you think, Daniel. It didn't get physical. That doesn't make it better, I snapped. You let him into our lives, into our marriage. Her head bowed, and her silence was damning. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The confrontation wasn't giving me the clarity I needed. If anything, it was making me more confused. Was she telling the truth, or was this another carefully crafted half-lie? The next day, I called Sarah again. She'd warned me Roberts was dangerous, and now I needed her insight more than ever. I confronted her, I said as soon as she picked up. And? She asked. She admitted it. Sort of, I said. She claimed it wasn't physical, but that doesn't explain everything. I need to know if Roberts has done this before. Did you find anything else? There was a pause before Sarah spoke. Actually, I did, she said. Roberts has a habit of getting involved with women who can help him, either through their connections or their work. He keeps things just ambiguous enough to maintain plausible deniability, but there's a pattern. And the bracelet? I asked. Does that fit his pattern? It does, Sarah confirmed. He's used gifts like that before. It's a power play, a way to keep people loyal to him. And when he's done with them, he moves on, leaving their lives in ruins. Her words felt like a gut punch. If Roberts was using Emma, she might be little more than a pawn in his game. But that didn't absolve her of the choices she'd made or the damage she'd done to our marriage. That evening, I decided to test Emma's loyalty. I asked her to show me everything, her emails, her messages, anything that could give me a clearer picture of her relationship with Roberts. She hesitated at first, but eventually she handed over her phone. As I scrolled through her messages, I noticed something strange. Several threads with Roberts had been deleted. When I asked her about it, her face turned pale. I didn't want you to misunderstand, she said, her voice shaky. I thought if you saw the messages, you'd think the worst. The worst? I repeated, my voice rising. Emma, deleting them doesn't make it better. It makes it worse. Now I don't know what to believe. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly. I didn't know what to do, she whispered. I was scared. Her tears softened me, but only slightly. I handed her phone back, my mind racing with frustration. You need to decide what matters more, I said. Your loyalty to him or your loyalty to this family? The breaking point came 2 days later. I received an anonymous text with an attached photo. Emma and Roberts standing close together at what looked like a private event. His hand was on her lower back, and the way they leaned toward each other left little room for misinterpretation. The message that accompanied the photo read, "Now you know the truth, handle it." I stared at the photo, my hands trembling. This wasn't just about a bracelet or a dinner. It was about power, manipulation, and secrets. Roberts wasn't just a threat to my marriage. He was a threat to everything Emma and I had built together. When I showed Emma the photo, she broke down completely. It wasn't supposed to go this far, she sobbed. I thought I could keep it professional, but I got caught up in it. I didn't know how to stop. You should have stopped before it started, I said coldly. But now it's too late. He's already taken everything. No, she said, shaking her head. He hasn't taken everything. Not yet. Her words felt desperate, almost defiant, but I wasn't sure I believed her. Trust was a fragile thing, and she'd shattered mine. The question now wasn't whether Roberts had manipulated her, it was whether she had let him. As the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, I realized the anonymous text was likely from Sarah. It fit her MO, direct, cutting, and strategic. If she wanted me to handle it, she must have known something I didn't. And if I wanted to protect what was left of my family, I'd need to confront Roberts myself. The anonymous text burned a hole in my thoughts. The photo of Emma and Roberts at the event had erased any lingering doubts I had about their relationship. No matter how Emma tried to spin it, this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a betrayal. But the text's final words stuck with me. Handle it. I knew what I had to do. The following evening, I attended one of Roberts' public events. It was a meet and greet at a luxury hotel downtown, a fundraiser for his latest political initiative. I wore a suit, blending in with the crowd of donors and influencers, but my focus was razor sharp. I spotted Roberts near the stage, shaking hands and flashing his polished smile. He radiated confidence, his charisma undeniable. For a moment, I hesitated. This man wasn't just my wife's lover. He was a politician with power, resources, and influence. If I confronted him, there was no telling how far he might go to protect himself, but I couldn't let that stop me. He had already taken too much from me. When the crowd thinned, I approached him. His eyes landed on me, his smile faltering slightly as he realized he didn't recognize me. Good evening, he said, extending his hand. Matthew Roberts. I shook his hand firmly, holding his gaze. Daniel Hayes. He tilted his head, clearly trying to place the name. Nice to meet you, Mr. Hayes. Are you involved with the foundation? In a way, I said, my tone cold. I'm Emma's husband. The change in his demeanor was subtle but telling. His smile tightened, his eyes narrowing slightly. Ah, he said, drawing out the syllable. Emma's spoken very highly of you. Funny, I said, letting the sarcasm seep into my voice. She's been less forthcoming about you. He took a step back, glancing around as if to ensure we weren't being overheard. I'm not sure what you're implying, Mr. Hayes, but this isn't the time or place. You're right, I said. It's not. But I'm here now, so let's cut the act. He stiffened, his polished facade cracking slightly. I think you should leave. I leaned in, lowering my voice. No, you're going to listen. I know about the bracelet. I know about the dinners, the events, the late-night messages. You've been using my wife, and I won't stand for it. His jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. I've done nothing inappropriate. Emma is a valuable part of our team, and any insinuation otherwise is baseless. Save the excuses, I snapped. You've been playing her, just like you've played so many others. But this stops now. If you don't, I'll make sure the media hears about your valuable relationships. His eyes narrowed, the threat landing exactly where I intended. Be careful, Mr. Hayes, he said, his voice low. You're stepping into dangerous territory. So are you, I replied. But unlike you, I've got nothing to lose. That night, I returned home and told Emma everything. I showed her the photo, the anonymous text, and recounted my confrontation with Roberts. She was quiet at first, her face pale as she absorbed my words. I didn't know he was like that, she said finally, her voice trembling. I thought he cared about me. He doesn't, I said bluntly. He cared about what you could give him. But now it's over. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'll step away from the foundation, she said. From all of it. It's not just about stepping away, I said. It's about rebuilding trust. And right now, I don't know if I can. Her tears turned to sobs and she reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Daniel, please, she begged. I made a mistake, but I never stopped loving you. I wanted to believe her, but the weight of her choices was too heavy. Love isn't enough, Emma, I said quietly. Not after this. In the weeks that followed, Emma resigned from the foundation and cut all ties with Roberts. He issued a carefully worded statement about her departure, framing it as a mutual decision, but I knew better. Sarah, true to her word, ensured that Roberts's reputation took a hit. A few well-placed articles hinted at his pattern of manipulation, and while no scandals erupted, his polished image was tarnished. As for Emma and me, the road ahead was uncertain. We started couples counseling, but the damage was done. Every session was a painful reminder of what we'd lost, and while Emma was willing to fight for our marriage, I wasn't sure if I could. Trust, once broken, doesn't heal easily. One evening, as we sat in the counselor's office, Emma asked me a question that stopped me in my tracks. Do you still love me? She asked, her voice raw. I hesitated, the silence stretching between us. I don't know, I said finally, but I'm willing to try. That's all I can give you right now. She nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. It wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was the truth. In the end, Roberts may have been the catalyst for our unraveling, but the fractures in our marriage had been there long before he entered the picture. Whether Emma and I could rebuild from the rubble remained to be seen, but for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope, fragile, but real. Sometimes the only way to move forward is to face the wreckage head on and decide whether it's worth rebuilding.